Greetings, friends. My name is Pavel Stelmach, and now we will dive into the top news of this day. The International Academy of the Nuremberg Principles adopted a declaration calling for the creation of a tribunal to prosecute crimes in Ukraine. The declaration was published on the website of the Academy. The authors of the document proposed expanding the powers of the International Criminal Court and creating a tribunal for prosecution of crimes committed in Ukraine. The authors also noted that they are appalled by the ongoing war of aggression that the Russian Federation is waging against Ukraine and the involvement of Belarus in this war of aggression.
The International Nuremberg Principles Academy, following on the thorough deliberation with leading international law experts in the historical Nuremberg Palace of Justice, reiterates that the crime of aggression is a crime under international law, emphasizes that this crime triggers individual criminal responsibility, calls upon the international community to ensure the prosecution of crimes of aggression, calls upon the international community to support the establishment of a tribunal to prosecute crimes of aggression as defined under international law committed on the territory of Ukraine. Nuremberg Declaration of the Crime of Aggression.
The leaders of the 37 members countries of the coalition, the core group for creation of special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine, held a meeting yesterday where they confirmed their support for the idea of creating such a mechanism. The Office of the President of Ukraine and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine announced. The summit demonstrated the unity of the coalition and proved that the responsibility of Russia's top leadership for the crime of aggression is inevitable. All participants unanimously confirmed their support for bringing Russia's top political and military leadership to justice for launching an aggressive war against Ukraine. As a result, the coalition member countries adopted a joint statement in which they support the idea of creating such a mechanism of justice.
The main culprit of the catastrophe did not make it to the tribunal. He carried out an obvious sentence for himself in the bunker, but his accomplices, including the key figures of the aggression, were punished in the legal sphere. They were punished by the way humanity punishes any criminals in a civilized manner, through prosecution, trial, sentence and its implementation. And this has served as a strong pillar to peace, a concrete example of how peace violators were punished by the whole world. Civilized punishment. Unfortunately, 68 years after the verdict of the Nuremberg trials, Europe again felt the blow of aggression, and that people and politicians of Europe would not dare to ally, defend their values, would not dare to fight against the new aggression in the way that was necessary to defend themselves.
Zelensky also noted that discussions about the model of the special tribunal and other details can be continued, but emphasized that it should be a tribunal. Earlier in his speech in The Hague, Volodymyr Zelensky criticized the idea of a hybrid tribunal, to which, as far as known, Western allies of Ukraine are more inclined. At the same time, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who was visiting Kyiv, also supported the creation of the tribunal.
The European Union supports the creation of a dedicated tribunal to try Russia's crime of aggression. At the first step, we must collect, store and analyze evidence. For this, we are setting up an international center for the prosecution of the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen, European Commission President, on Twitter.
I will remind, the idea of creating a special tribunal in November 2022 was proposed by the European Union. It was officially supported in January by voting in the European Parliament and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Russia is massively violating its obligations as an occupying power under the Geneva Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war. A forced passportization campaign is underway. Those who do not want to take a Russian passport are deprived of human rights. Under the pretext of counterintelligence and counter-terrorism measures, repressions are intensifying. People are kidnapped, tortured, imprisoned for the slightest guilt, such as inappropriate content on the phone. The invaders are implementing a program of de-Ukrainization on the occupied territories, displacing the Ukrainian language from the public sphere and imposing Russianism on children and young people. Under the slogans of evacuation, the occupiers are conducting an arbitrary deportation of Ukrainians. In particular, in Enerhodar, Russians are separating Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant employees from their families, whose members are taken out of the city.
У Енергодарі російські окупанти
In Enerhodar, the Russian occupiers organized a so-called evacuation for family members of Zaporizhzhia NPP employees. Yet the employees of the power plant are not allowed to leave the city. The so-called authorities put in office by the occupation forces announced the evacuation to recreation centers and hotels of Berdyansk and Kirillivka. However, those who agreed were taken to Ross region in Russia and placed in tent camps. The situation was somehow different in Velika Belozerka. Last week, most of the collaborators used their own vehicles to leave for Crimea.
Russians want to change the demographic composition of the population. Instead of deported Ukrainians, a social element from Russia is brought to the temporarily occupied territories, people with a criminal past, drug addicts, homeless people, etc. Without fail, representatives of the occupation administration, collaborators, children, teachers, and educators fall under the evacuation. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine informed. Moreover, the collaborators and people who were brought in stand in line at the gas station for fuel, as the drivers were informed that no new deliveries were planned. In Vesela was closed and the Department of the Occupation Police no longer functions, and the destruction of documentation was recorded. I have the impression that the Russians are preparing for a Ukrainian counterattack and another regrouping. The Kremlin does not stop trying to destroy the grain deal and restore the blockade of the supply of Ukrainian food to the world. Russia is waging a hybrid war against Europe and using food blackmail as an element of pressure on the West. Artificial creation of food shortages on the global market is Russia's tool to counter-sanction and spread anti-Western propaganda. Moscow wants to stop participating in the grain deal, to steal and export grain from the occupied territories of Ukraine under the guise of a product of Russian origin. Russia spends the proceeds from its own export on the aggression against Ukraine. It is in the interest of global food security to stop Russian aggression and restore normal trade through the Black Sea ports.
The immediate priority now is that the grain transit goes seamlessly and at the lowest possible cost outside from Ukraine towards the European Union. This requires a very close cooperation of the different stakeholders. Therefore, we will jointly set up a coordination platform so that we will get these solidarity lanes fully functioning. Again, this is important.
Recently, the Russian side has been stopping any movement of ships carrying Ukrainian grain to countries that need it several times a week. At the same time, the Russians are using all possible methods to stop the export of grain. They accuse Ukraine of using the grain corridor to launch strikes on Crimea. They changed the procedure for inspecting ships. As of Monday, 90 vessels were awaiting inspection in Turkish territorial waters, of which 62 are vessels that are being loaded. Inspections of both the incoming and outgoing fleet were suspended due to the actions of the Russian side. For now, that concludes our today's video. Thank you for staying with us and keep tuned for future videos. Subscribe to UATV English and goodbye.